Anyway, the matter then exploded in Canada, and I was hauled before the Senate Committee on Agriculture with my colleagues, and we had to testify under oath. And what happened? This is the beginning of the my trouble and exposure of Health Canada and exposure of the U.S. What the U.S. did, how it happened. In any case, eventually,
For most of our listeners don't understand the trouble you went through, so the one you just referenced. So you are not currently working for Health Canada. Now, were you fired from Health Canada, or did you voluntarily leave eventually? And what year was that?
no, in in 2004, two of my colleagues and I were fired by Health Canada on charges of insubordination. We're still in court for wrongful dismissal. 6 years later, we're still expecting the decision on whether we were insubordinate or not. Insubordination means that you refuse to work. We didn't refuse to work, but we refused to pass drugs which we thought should not be passed. And so courts will have to decide whether we were insubordinate or not. So that's
Well,
beside the point.
that's an interesting commentary on the entire system, and maybe equally as important as to the facts that we're discussing, in that the entire system that is designed to protect the public health really doesn't work anymore. Because when you have concerned scientists who really understand the issues and voice these concerns, at least in Health Canada, they're fired. They're dismissed because they interfere with the collusion between government and these large multinational corporations whose primary intent and purpose is to increase their bottom line profits and not to serve the public health.
This is very interesting. It's pertinent. Actually, a year ago, I published a book describing all the things that we're talking about in Canada, US, and the world, and what can be done to solve the problem. And my book, as you know, is called Corrupt to the Core: Memoirs of a Health Canada Whistleblower. It tells the whole story of science through my life, how I grew up in India, how I went into science, how I became a veterinarian, and it was going to be the most wonderful job ever for anybody, and it was, until I studied and graduated and worked outside. And now I thought I got the most wonderful job working for the government, which will do. I now was receiving the latest information on any technology, on any product, because it was my job as a regulator to receive before the data gets published. But then at the same time, the pressure from the companies on the politicians, and the politicians through the higher levels of bureaucracy down to the scientist level, that you pass it. Because if we pass it, that's the only safety they have. Because if the scientist says pass it, then the politicians and the higher bureaucrats are off the hook. They say, well, the scientists approved it under the law.
So that is their workaround. They do not have to prove it in peer-reviewed scientific literature. That, to the heck with that. All they have to do is to manipulate the regulatory authorities in the specific country, and they can use that as proof and documentation rather than the science that their product is safe. Is that correct?
Absolutely, because the law in the United States and Canada, and presumably in other countries, simply say the companies that want to sell any product for humans or animals, which will be consumed for food by people, must do research, must produce their own data, and bring to the government for verification. And verification in Canada is only paper verification. We don't do any testing. The US FDA does get involved in the actual testing, clinical testing, and so on. US is a large country. They had the resources to do it, and their laws required that to be done. But not in Canada. We received the same data. We were supposed to receive the same data that the US FDA received, and only a paper exercise based on that will say we want more data, or we approve it, or we don't approve it, or if we don't approve it, we put some precautions, warnings, and so on. But the pressure was not to do any of those things, not to require data, don't put any precautions, don't raise any questions, just pass it. Because now the bosses are receiving these orders by policy only, not by law, from higher up in the political circles. In Canada, our system, unlike because we are a parliamentary democracy, so we have the highest level of government called the Privy Council. Privy Council is composed of the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, and the clerk of the Privy Council, who is secretary to the Prime Minister and to the Cabinet, and head of the entire bureaucracy. This is the way Canadian system works. Now, the pressure
But
was
point is
coming.
clear. Just a point. Yeah, where's that's the question. Where is this pressure coming from? How did the manipulation come down through the chain to cause you to force you into that situation where you were either fired and stuck to your guns and told the truth, or comply with to what the requests were?
Well, the way the pressure works is that the politicians at every election time, the companies, the drug companies, pharmaceutical companies, slaughterhouses, all these mega companies uh, get together, and they bring pressure on the politicians because they make political donations and so forth, and they put a wager on every political party, and that's how and there are lobbyists, registered lobbyists, and then they even get jobs inside the cabinets, like Michael Taylor at the US FDA, and there were people like that in our in Canada as well, working in the Minister of Health's office, and pressuring that where is this product, where is that product, and so it's that kind of pressure, incestuous relationship between corporations and the government, and the public just assumes because government is looking after them, public just just assumes everything is all right. If an individual scientist like me blows the whistle, and then of course everybody gangs up, and then they say he's not a team player, he's a troublemaker, and get rid of him. And I have letters all documented in my book, how the companies wrote to the Minister of Health, how they went to the Privy Council, how they went to the Prime Minister, fire Shiv Chopra and fire whoever stands with him. And that's how three of us were fired. So that is the kind of pressure that the companies have. You know, it's an interesting thing that we talk about pressure. It's not a new phenomenon. This began as a competition after Second World War between the communist world and the capitalist world to produce more food. After all, it was food, or lack of food, lack of enough food, and nutritious food that always starts the war. And it did start those First World War, Second World War, and at the end of the Second World War, technology now was going to rule the roost. And therefore, the competition between the communist bloc, and the capitalist bloc was now going to take control of all food producing systems everywhere. And what happened? The communist world fell apart much before the capitalist world, and too much food was produced. Currently, there's too much food everywhere, and especially in the capitalist world. Europe, the European Union, NAFTA countries, and now into the fray are getting in South America, India, China, Brazil, South Africa, so-called BRIC countries, and all of them are producing too much food, and they're all producing toxic food everywhere. The American and Canadian food now has become the most